towards the end of the von Neumann biography, the author talks about Stephen Wolfram's idea of cellular automata and how it originated with von Neumann, and then Wolfram wrote the book A New Kind of Science. The idea is that simple rules can potentially lead to very complex behaviors. In other words, simple rules could be the underlying dynamics that created our universe, or in order to understand what is behind the complexity of our universe, we might actually be able to find simple rules that proliferate through time and create the universe. Now, Wolfram himself talks about computational irreducibility. In other words, even if we find that rule, it doesn't mean we can just go back and forth in time and predict things, because certain outcomes are just irreducible. You just have to iterate. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because I want to connect it to Richard Sutton and call it a new kind of intelligence. Sutton's idea of the ongoing learner, the open-endedness, also people at DeepMind work on this, particularly Jack Parker-Holder and others in the open-endedness department of DeepMind. Apparently there is one. What this all means for me is a very, very interesting approach towards intelligence, because the idea of open-endedness means that an agent learns from experience in runtime. These are words that Richard Sutton is using, so I'm paraphrasing Sutton. I think it's a new kind of intelligence because it is following a similar rule like Wolfram's idea of cellular automata, which is that you start with very simple rules or simple rewards in the case of Sutton, and you increase the complexity of the agent by interacting with the environment. The difference, of course, between Wolfram and Sutton is creating the agent, Wolfram is explaining the system. But that's besides the point. I want to focus now on Sutton and just use the idea of cellular automata, I think, to better understand Sutton's approach, which is you have this simple rule, a simple reward that could be based on a goal, for example, reduce entropy, or maybe it could be a rule like a geometric rule, like make sure that you're surrounded by at least two people that are beneficial to you, something like that. We don't know exactly what those goals are, the same way that Wolfram wasn't able to find the rule that explains the universe. But I think that fundamental idea of having a simple goal or rule, I'm using this now as synonyms. So in Sutton's world, it's a goal. A simple goal that is proliferating throughout time or epochs or rollouts, creating a very complex environment, creating a complex agent, a very intelligent agent, because the agent interacts with a non-stationary environment. That's the key, right? The reason we get to extremely complex behavior from simple rules is because in Sutton's world, the agent is learning from the environment. In Wolfram's world, that's not so clear, but you could argue the same way. You could say that the reason we reach complexity in the universe is because the simple rule is calibrating itself against nature, which makes it more and more complex. Now, I'm not a big fan of the new kind of science for several reasons, but I think in fundamental terms, I do agree with the approach of Richard Sutton, because that's how intelligence at least has a good chance of solving interesting problems. The way this can be done in a time scale that is more relevant to us, so we don't have to wait another million years, is through the creation of many worlds. And that's something Jack Parker-Holder is working on and others. So the open-endedness team at DeepMind with Genie at its core is trying to build these worlds on which the agent can learn. That's the key, right? So you need to have simple rules, but you need to have lots of iterations. The difference between the digital form of AI and the human form of AI, in my opinion, is the ability for the digital form to iterate through a lot more rollouts than a human. And to answer Carlo Rivelli's question, how does it feel like to be a machine? I mean, he's not the only one who asked that question, but he's one of them last year at TED AI at San Francisco. The answer is, well, it feels different than a human intelligence because the human just doesn't have the ability to iterate over millions or billions of rollouts in many worlds to find a possible trajectory that could be beneficial. Also to learn things that we just don't know right now. The reason knowledge is unpredictable, the reason knowledge grows in a non-stationary way is the same way that any kind of intelligence grows in a non-stationary way. It's because we are iterating epoch by epoch, and we have, in human terms, we only have one lifetime, so it takes time, and a machine can do this at massive scale in parallel. So that's why I believe we will have super intelligence at least better than humans, based on simple rules or goals, learning from experience in runtime, and that's the parallel that I see with cellular automata and the complexity that arises from simple rules in Stefan Wolfram's world. Thank you.